later on. Welcome to everyone, and we're going to start a 5-minute PowerPoint talk, which gives a narrative of the timeline. I will share my screen, and we should go straight into U3A Community's Current Affairs Forum. Let's decide what an unwinnable war is. I've got a script. I'm not going to read that yet. An unwinnable war is one that the United States has experienced with Vietnam. This is the last helicopter leaving from Saigon. It decided it just could not continue the war against the Viet Cong and left it all to the South Vietnam forces, which failed. The result of that, total number of deaths for an unwinnable war, 1,353,000. You can see that at the bottom of the screen. No need for me to read this script out. You can read it for yourself very quickly, and I will press on. Another unwinnable war, of course, came later, which was Afghanistan. Almost identical with Vietnam. The interesting thing about Vietnam, of course, is that it is now a favorite place for Americans to go on holiday, where they are met with very great kindness and effusiveness, which is surprising, really. I don't think they would get the same result from Afghanistan. But then they only 172,390 died in that particular unwinnable war. Here's another unwinnable war. It was called the Cold War. And in 1990, Gorbachev, who was then in power, decided that, in fact, the Warsaw Pact could never win against NATO, which was obviously much larger and much richer. So he adopted a policy of glasnost, openness. And that meant, in fact, that he would be prepared to give up, or the Soviet Union would be prepared to give up the Warsaw Pact countries and make them free to elect their own governments as they wished, which in fact happened. One of the trigger points actually was in Gdansk. The Polish shipyard workers formed a union, called it Solidarność, and that eventually joined as part of Poland's new government, 1990. The famous words, "not 1 inch eastward," were actually uttered. And here they were again, not once, but 3 times. And it might be useful for me to read out some words I got from Wikipedia, in fact. Let's see, the West German Chancellor Helmut Kohl assured Gorbachev in February 1990, "We believe that NATO should not expand the sphere of its activity." Good. 1991 saw the Warsaw Pact dissolve formally, and all the different parts of the Warsaw Pact countries could go their own way. The following year, 1992, Bill Clinton, President of the United States, made the fateful decision to push for including former Warsaw Pact countries in NATO. So they proposed inviting Poland, the Czech Republic, and Hungary to become members. And that was approved by the US Senate to add them to the North Atlantic Treaty. Strobe Tolber, who is Secretary of State, the USA, described the Russian attitude. They have disbanded the Warsaw Pact, their military alliance, and asked why the West should not do the same. It was an excellent question then, and I don't think we've had an answer, actually. 1998, it all happened, and the NATO was expanded. George Kennan, who was not exactly a pacifist, said of America's containment policy, "I think it is the beginning of a new Cold War. I think the Russians will gradually react adversely and it will affect their policies. I think it is a tragic mistake. There was no reason for this whatever. No one was threatening anybody else." However, NATO expanded. And that is the situation that we have currently at the moment, with the military capabilities of NATO lined up, in effect, to contain Russia. Vladimir Putin, of course, who took over from Boris Yeltsin, who effectively made the transition from the Soviet Union to Russia, the Russian Federation, said in 2007, you can read this once again for yourself. I would like to read the last bit. "NATO expansion represents a serious provocation that reduces the level of mutual trust, and we have the right to ask, against whom is this expansion intended, and what happened to the assurances our Western partners made after the dissolution of the Warsaw Pact?" The situation will probably get worse if Finland joins NATO, and it will probably be accepted. Then that is another border on Russia, with NATO forces pointing eastwards. So not another inch eastward obviously didn't mean what it sounded like. Putin was very unhappy about that, and being a rather, what can we say, a narcissistic person, he has used his narcissism very effectively. Let us have a look at Vladimir Putin. The narcissism seems to be fairly obvious. This sort of thing has been, was appearing quite regularly on Russian television. He's, of course, quite ready to be proud of his judo black belt. It's real. He hasn't made it up. He is that sort of outdoorsy person. And his hockey team, which doesn't win many games, but, you know, it puts across a version of the man, the person himself. And he uses that in order to project an image of strength. He has no intention of appearing weak, which I suppose is part of his narcissism. This, I think, sums it up, really. A leopard cub, a smiling Vladimir Putin. And he is using that, and he's using it very effectively. His approval rating goes up every time he does something, which is aggressive. You can see what happened when he sent troops into Ukraine. Immediately shut up. And once again, he's using that in order to poison the young people of his country. And this is the thing that worries me personally, mostly, and that he is poisoning the minds and hearts of a whole country. And that is something that will last for decades. We have seen an example of this. I put it to you, I'm sticking my neck out slightly, I know, but America fought a civil war 160 years ago. And that has echoed down the decades. Even now, today, 2023, that still continues to poison the hearts and minds of some states of the United States of America. 4 in 10 among white Southerners sympathized more with the Confederacy than with the Union. I'm going to stop there. I hope I haven't taken too long, and invite discussion. If you would like a copy of this PowerPoint, please write to me. And we're continuing to record, and I invite people to unmute themselves and either make a point or ask a question. Robert puts his finger up. Oh yes, by the way, it's best if you use the yellow mechanical hand, because that puts you right at the top of the screen, my screen.
Right.
Robert.
Right. I'll make a few points first. Actually, malaria killed more GIs in Vietnam than the Viet Cong. All right. So, you know, that's something to bear in mind. The British or the English went into Afghanistan the first time they invaded, and what the Afghanis did was they let one person out. The whole army was wiped out except for one, and I think he was deliberately let out so he could tell the people back home what had happened. And then I think it was the second invasion when they actually took over Afghanistan. But certainly, you know, the British had a tough time there, or the English had a pretty tough time. Now, the thing for me about Putin is he was a street thug before he was recruited to the KGB, and that street thug mentality stayed with him while he was in the KGB, and it's still with him because he's a president, but he was brought up as a street thug. And the only thing I think he understands is violence. Now, to put the Russia into a kind of historic perspective, the Russian GDP last year was something like 1.77 trillion. The GDP of Spain was something like 1.24 trillion. So you're looking at an economy which is the size of Spain, you know? And Spain has never really been a significant country since about 1840, when it lost its empire. Now, if you kind of look at the world from the Russian perspective, unless they can get their empire back one way or another, it's a one-way decline. You know, their economy, they don't do anything. They produce raw materials, you know, but they produce very little else. And countries that produce raw materials are never important. They're never powerful, right? So he basically has to do something because he's got a country which is in decline, yeah. And you know, I just finish off with say that Ukraine, you know, as soon as Ukraine was free, there was always these problems with Russia about the gas prices, about this, about that, right? And there's no reason why the Ukraine would want to join, you know, with the Russians. But Putin's going around saying that, well, the Ukraine was always part of Russia, which is an absolute nonsense, because the Ukraine existed as a country way longer than Russia. Yeah.
Right. Thank you, Robert. A response from someone else? Donal has unmuted himself, which perhaps indicates that he might want to make a point. Nobody else wants to speak? Oh, we can all go home, can we? Yes, Barry.
I'll just unmute myself. Yes, I'll say something then. I think, I mean, I'm sure your introduction, Tom, was intended to be a balanced representation of the situation, but you know, you have that maybe coloured some of it. But I'll pass on that and just need to remember who the aggressor is here. The aggressor, Putin, and the aggression began not last year, but in 2014 when he annexed the Crimea. And I fear that the seeds of what's happening now were laid back then when we firm enough stand on that issue.
I completely agree, Barry, with what you say, and I never intended to be to defend Vladimir Putin and Russia. That is not the point. I just merely gave a timeline.
The other
initially, when we said we would not go an inch further east, we were lying in our teeth.
Okay, that's debatable. So can I just say one more thing? You presented some data on public opinion in Russia. How many people are in favor of what Putin's doing and how many are against? I think I don't need to tell everybody else here that I think we need to be a little bit careful about opinions expressed by Russian people, because we know that their press is tightly controlled. They're only told what the leadership wants them to hear. So even if those figures are accurate, suspicious of, I think we've got to remember that they've been brainwashed for.
Oh yes, they've been brainwashed. Right? Can I?
So yeah, I'll be quiet.
Can I switch to Donald Denham?
Well, thank you, Tom. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, hear you.
Good. Well, if you build up great expectations, I'm not sure I am capable of delivering on them. But a few thoughts occurred. Hello? Sorry. Can you hear me on?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. Oh, good. A few thoughts occurred to me. First of all, no, I don't think anybody wins in war as a general approach. I think maybe certain philosophies, certain ideas, certain perspectives are victorious and others are not. But in human terms, we all suffer in war, and we must remember, even in this most recent conflict, that there are people suffering in Russia and in Ukraine and beyond, indeed, in other places. Secondly, you might all be interested to know, if you haven't already seen any reports, that here in Ireland, we have literally just begun this week. Yesterday, it was the first session of a public forum organised by the government, by the Department of Foreign Affairs of Ireland, but open to anybody who's interested, and I shall be going next Tuesday. A debate, a public debate on our neutrality, what we call our military neutrality. And I'm glad to see, Tom, in your maps of Europe, you showed that the Republic of Ireland is indeed non-aligned. So it'll be very interesting to see. Allied to this point, it's very, I think it's very significant anyway that this conflict has generated another 2 additional members of NATO. Most unlikely candidates, Sweden and Finland, which, and I was Irish ambassador to Finland in Helsinki in 2015, and I would have put money against Finland ever joining NATO. So already Putin has, if you like, caused himself self-harm by increasing the size and capability of NATO right on his border, and removing 2 strong neutral powers. Yes. So I think that's very much a Pyrrhic victory.
A very good point. A very good point. Can I switch to Roger?
Can I just say? Could I just finish with the third point? We lost in Europe, and I think in the Western world, we lost an opportunity in the late 1980s when the Soviet Union was collapsing and had collapsed, to get in early and to support Russia to try and change the mentality that Robert so well put of the classic traditional Russian imperial designs and the chaos of their domestic situation and their lack of democratic tradition. We lost an opportunity. So we're actually responsible, I think, for this war. We ourselves, not anybody
Right.
else. We
Right.
had an opportunity and we didn't take it.
That's another very interesting point. Thank you very much, Donald. Roger.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon. I'm afraid I shall have to leave at 12:30. This is my first visit to this forum. I just wanted to make a couple of points. I have no brief for Russia at all, but we need to remember that the Western Europe has twice invaded Russia during the Napoleonic Wars and during the Second World War, when Germany invaded Russia. So you can begin to understand their feelings about it. I mean, Tom Holloway made a very good point about the way in which the American Civil War still resonates. The Battle of the Boyne still resonates in Ireland, and that's 1690? That's over
right.
300 years ago. So these psychological things resonate for decades and centuries. So we mustn't forget that that's part of the reasons why Russia behaves in the way they do. I agree with it that Russia is the aggressor on this occasion, but we have to look at the background of the situations if we want to understand what's going on in the world today.
Yes, thank you very much.
And I'm sorry, but I shall have to go at 12:30. So.
Okay, well, thank you for coming, Roger. I switch to Robert in Newcastle.
Right. Well, first of all, there's a question, which is, how can you tell when a politician's lying? And the answer to that is his lips are moving. Now, yeah, so Tom, you made the statement that NATO were lying through their teeth, 9 months, as soon as like 9 months after this were not 1 inch. Yeah. Now, my people were Polish, and I've just come back from Poland, as you can see from a T-shirt. Anyway, there's a pathological hatred of Russians by Poles because we were slaves to them for 200 years or whatever. It's just an accident of geography, but we happened to be next to them, which was like not a good place to be. And also, I've been to Estonia. They've got problems with the Russians. So actually, after the end of the Second World War, Russia exported hundreds of thousands of Russians to Estonia. So, and it seems to be that Putin's got this attitude that if there is a Russian minority of any sort inside of a country, then we have the right to annex that part of the country where the Russians are. Yeah. And lastly, I'd sort of say, well, NATO is expanding, but then you can say, well, the only defense for small countries against Russia is to join NATO. Yeah. That the threat is to the small countries. Yeah. And it's like if the West invaded Russia, we would have a nuclear war. So I don't see there being a threat to Russia from the West, except this thing of encirclement.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. No one else has their hand up. Any comments, any questions that you would like to put? Yes, Donald.
Just to follow on from what Robert has just said, I spent 5 years in Lithuania, one of the largest of the 3 Baltic countries. And I have to say, coming from the West, I was surprised by at least 2 things. First of all, the huge military nature of their history, going back to when they were part of the Russian Empire. And they had serious crossroads of battles going back to the Middle Ages, right up through First and Second World Wars. So Eastern Europe, I think, deserves more study. Secondly, I was really taken aback to discover that the Lithuanians, and this is Robert's point, the Lithuanians were much more interested in joining NATO and having indeed NATO planes on their soil to protect them than they were in the European Union. And I think you could replicate that for 7 or 8 of the newer member states from
Yes.
Central and Eastern Europe. They're much more much more conscious of the big bear at their border and the fact that they were abused under the Soviet Union.
Yes. In
There are
fact,
so many
they were part
nuances
of
in that.
Poland at one time.
Yeah, yeah. But
All the comments or questions. Can I hear from people who have not spoken yet? Yes, Smile James.
Yeah. Thank you, Tom. It's also, I think, not realized that much of Ukraine is, or certainly Kiev, or whichever we call it nowadays, is basically the cradle of Russian Orthodox Christianity. It's an extremely important place in Russian history. And how Russians regard, how would we regard, let's rephrase that, how would we regard somewhere important to our history being taken over into a separate country? I think there's a problem there. I think there's a deep historical problem, and I think the other historical problem,
yes, certainly as far as World War II is concerned,
is something that Donald alluded to, and Donald knows far more about it than me for sure. But the history of Eastern Europe and Eastern European states is not one of committed borders. Living on an island, we have the idea of borders and you draw a line round it.
right.
It's easy to draw a line round it. In East Europe particularly, when one thinks of the major invasions that have happened and the major changes which have happened, it's not easy to draw a line and say everybody to the north of this is likely to sympathize with Russia and everybody to the south with the Ukraine, or anything like that.
Donald wants to interrupt.
Sorry, I do, just briefly, but I have to. It's an instinctive guttural reaction coming from a colony, England's oldest colony. I have to say that the capacity of the Foreign Office and the Imperial Foreign Office to draw red lines around the map of Europe in the late 19th and early 20th century was unrivaled.
Yes, yes.
One
of the earlier important people, Nikita Khrushchev, was from the Ukraine. Hilda.
Can you hear?
Yes, we hear you, but you're muted again. So unmute again.
Hello?
Yes, now we hear you.
Okay. Just to give my background, I'm nowhere near as knowledgeable as some of you gentlemen, but I am German born, came to England in the 50s, married an Englishman and have lived here ever since. What I want to say is, with some of the comments several people made, it does not give a country the right to march into another country just because new boundaries have been formed. And you've got a very, very good example in Italy and Austria, with France and Germany, where, and you've got Spain and France, again, the Basques, I think they're called, and elections have taken place and democratically elected boundaries have been drawn. And once these have been done, they need to be upheld, in my opinion. Or else, if people don't like it, then we have to go and democratically vote again to change the boundaries if the majority wants it. Just like we've got Brexit, because the numbers who voted for Brexit were bigger than the numbers against. And then we've got to be democratic and follow and do the best with what's been voted.
Right.
I do not accept this fact that anybody can invade anybody just because the boundaries were different 100 years ago.
Right. Thank you very much. Any more points to be made?
Oh, I've got my hand up.
You got your hand. Oh, sorry, Robert.
Electronic hand up. Anyway, yeah. I responded to Mail about it that you see, to the best of my knowledge, the Ukraine was never part of Russia. It might have been conquered by Russia, but it was never part of it. Yeah.
Right. Thank you. Barry Zussman.
Can I come back up? Sorry.
Yes, very quickly.
Yeah, can I come back on that? I think you could argue that in the 12th or 13th centuries or 14th century, something like that, Russia was in fact part of Ukraine, and Ukraine was Russia.
Right, thank you very much. Barry had his hand up. Barry?
Yeah, I just wanted to say about the. I mean, the subtitle of this meeting is another unwinnable war. Yeah, and we can all think of several of those, even in recent times. And I just want to say that for those who oppose these unwinnable wars, you have to suggest an alternative to solving a problem where an autocratic leader takes it as his moral responsibility to invade another country, or indeed within his own borders. And we need to have an alternative way of dealing with that if war is an option.
Right. I would like to invite Donald to speak again. Are we now moving towards thinking what might happen in future? How will this play out in the next few years? Donald.
Thanks, Tom. And just to say very quickly, for those who are interested in the history and background of these countries, there's an excellent book called The Reconstruction of Nations by Timothy Schneider, a very reputable US historian. It's a great book to read. It really is quite a revelation. And it reflects the confusion that we have about Ukraine and Poland and Lithuania and the Baltics and Russia and what it all was and where it came from. So they are all interlinked, and those borders have changed many, many times, alas, Hilda, in history. Most recently, at the end of the Second World War, Ukraine and Poland both moved to the east or right of the or left of the map. So there's all sorts of complications. But can I just say on the future?
Can I ask you to repeat the name of the book?
Yes, and if you like, I'll put it in the chat when I finish talking. It's called The Reconstruction of Nations. And it's a history of Central and Eastern Europe, in particular, 4 countries. It's a terrific read, and he has a great reputation. He still makes lots of comments on what's going on there. In relation to the future, inevitably we're going to have peace at some stage. Inevitably, somebody is going to have to talk to Putin, and somebody's going to have to talk to Zelensky, and they're going to have to talk to each other. So, you know, the sooner, to my mind, the sooner that process gets going, rather than fueling the fire with fighter jets and more rockets and tactical nuclear weapons and all the rest of it. And I'm only saying from my perspective, but from my perspective, I'd like to see some enduring attempt at a peace process begin, because I don't see anything good happening over the next 12 months. And it's a sad situation. In the longer term, you know, why are we all fighting one another in Europe? Why do we do it? There are much more important problems out there. We're destroying the world. The environment is going to kill us all.
Yes, that's hanging over us, the sword of Damocles. Any more comments, please? Robert, you've got your hand up again.
Right. Well, first of all, I would say that over thousands of years, for a very unpopular leader the best thing you can do to increase your popularity is to start a war. Get yourself into a war that you're going to win. And if you went back to something like, I think it was 1980, Thatcher, they had polls in Madame Tussauds, I think it was, and Thatcher was the least popular politician in the history of this country. And then lo and behold, we get ourselves into a war with the Argentinians over the Falklands. And then she could, you know, she could do no wrong after that. She could walk on water as far as a lot of people were concerned. Yeah. So, and I think Putin needs this war, you know, or he blundered into it because he thought he needed it, because he thought it was extremely winnable. But the quality of his tanks, the quality of his men is very, very poor. And so it's not working out the way that he would want it to work out. Yeah. You know, as again, I say, it wasn't a mistake. It was an actual blunder. But
Yes,
he did that. He absolutely.
very definitely. I agree. Any more comments from those who have not spoken so far? No? Yes, John Abbott.
Yes, the only thing I'd like to say is that the unwinnable wars that you mentioned beforehand only came to an end when the invader recognized that it was an unwinnable war, and they had to give up and admit that they're lost. Now, I cannot see any way that any unwinnable war can be won as long as the aggressor thinks either it can be won or that he's got more, he doesn't wish to lose space, got more to lose by withdrawing than he has by continuing. And it seems to me that with all that has been said about Putin, the war will only terminate when he accepts that the war is unwinnable, and that seems unlikely. The only alternative to that is some sort of deposition, some sort of putsch. And again, if the approval ratings are any sort of reflection of public opinion in Russia, then that is unlikely to happen. However public opinion is manipulated in Russia, a leader must always follow his people, otherwise he ceases to be the leader. So that there must inevitably be a great deal of public support for Putin in Russia. Otherwise, this would have noticed in the form of public resistance. So I think that the prospects for this war to terminate are very poor indeed. It would be a long while before Putin recognizes that the war is unwinnable.
I would like to disagree. I think that Putin has quite deliberately created that his popularity by manipulating television and radio and locking up anybody that disagrees with him. He is not following what his country wishes or approves of. He's creating it.
Yes, I think you're over-exaggerating the extent to which that can happen. You can only push people in a direction that they're willing to go. There was, I think it was Hugh Cudlip many years ago in the 50s, when the Daily Mirror was a very the largest newspaper in the world, and it was very influential. And they had a campaign, I think Churchill must go. And they also had a campaign about the Irish horse trade, both of which were completely successful. And then they had another campaign, Eden must go, and that failed. Hugh Cudlip eventually discovered and stated that a newspaper or a manipulator of public opinion can identify a groundswell of public opinion, and it can exaggerate it and manipulate it into an unstoppable tidal wave, but it cannot create the groundswell in the first place. So I'm totally convinced that no dictator, I mean Hitler, for example, and Goebbels were the most successful manipulators of public opinion in history, as far as I'm aware. but they were only able to take the German people in a direction they wished to go. And the same with Putin. You can only lead people where they wish to go. If the mace bearer of a band turned left and the rest of the band carried on, he'd look a bit of an idiot.
Yes, good, thank you very much. Any more comments? Because we've had 42 minutes and it's been a very good and interesting discussion. We haven't necessarily reached a conclusion, except that we don't like war, but then we never did we? This will be recorded. Thank you very much. And you can find it in u3acommunities.org/videos anytime that you would like to play it back. Thank you for coming. No more comments. I bid you all goodbye and good luck. See you next time.
Can I just say, I hope the England ladies cricket team have better luck in their ashes.
They need it. They need it.
Well, your cricket team didn't do
Closing down. Thank you, Barry, for your
your cricket team didn't do too well against England.
It didn't, but I wouldn't be talking too much about that, Robert.
Okay.
Thanks, Tom.
Switching off. Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody.
Thanks, Tom. Good luck.
Yes.